All right, so I wanted to make a detailed build guide going over the build that I've been playing for about a week now. Me and my friend have been doing a number of iterations with a variety of different investments, trying to kind of pinpoint some of the best configurations for this build. And over the past week, we've learned a number of things, and we've gone down two kind of different branches for the end game possibilities of this build. So all I wanted to do was do a full build breakdown. We'll go over the gear that I'm using, the passive tree, skills, defensive layers. We will talk about the mechanisms at play. We'll go over some POE stuff, and then at the very end, we will also talk about some of the possibilities of the build, including a fairly budget version, which we did a number of different tests with. And my friend has a kind of breakdown of the build itself, which I will link in the description, but it was around a 10 to 12 divine investment on that version of the build. So what is the build? What are we working towards? Well, as many people have seen across Reddit, other content creators, other people's Twitch streams, Totem Explode is getting a lot of popularity right now. And there's a reason for it, and that's because it's probably the single-handed most broken node that they added with the weapon passive skill trees. We'll obviously go over the damage numbers and why this thing is entirely busted. To start out, let's go over the gear for my build. Now, I am playing a Pathfinder, and I have opted into going for a bow route. This is the gear that I'm currently running. To start out, probably the most expensive piece on the build, but also very much craftable yourself, is a 6-link Maraketh bow with cast speed essence for damage dot multi, and then with just those two suffixes, you're able to craft cannot roll attack mods, regular exalt slam to get +1 to level of socketed gems, and then you're able to hunter exalt slam to get 86%. Well, I got 86% increased cast damage over time, which is T2. You could get T1, and I believe there's a T3. But it's entirely deterministic. Once you've done that, you just craft on +2 to level of socketed support gems. And in this case, I hit it with a YOLO Exalt at the end. There's not really many suffixes that do anything for us, and I didn't have room on it to craft multiple crafted mods. So figured I did it with a YOLO Exalt and see if maybe I hit something cool, which I did end up hitting fizz damage reduction, which is kind of interesting. But that is the bow. For the helmet, we are running a physical damage taken from hits is taken as fire on the fracture, and then essence spammed for efficiency until we got good life. With crafted, +1 AoE, and then for the implicits, we are opting into more is taken as with the despair curse effect. For the quiver, really this is just a stat stick on a vile arrow quiver base, giving us 15% physical damage as extra chaos damage, and then just life reses. Then you can also get attributes here, basically just a stat stick. And ashes, not crazy rolled to 1227. You could probably pretty easily pick one of these up or pretty close to the minimum price of ashes, so nothing super expensive here. We do have Sovereignty Anointed, which is a triple silver anoint. Ming's Heart, this is a fairly well rolled one off perfect. These aren't terribly expensive either, and then you just hit it with the Fizz and Chaos modifiers Catalyst, and you're able to get this up to a much higher Fizz damages extra Chaos. I am running a 6-link lightning coil, but you don't need this to be 6-link. I'm running Withering Step in here to get some benefit from the other supports that are in here, but I could just as easily run it over here and change this to an Arcanist brand setup. So there's nothing too crazy, nothing too expensive about this piece. You could just use a 5-link lightning coil, and actually you don't even need the Enlighten here, since this is on our arrogance, so this is just increasing our total health pool by running this. You don't even need this, so you theoretically could run a 4-link lightning coil here. We are running another ring just for attributes to fill some of our attribute requirements and life. boots, again, life, spell suppress, and whatever else you can fit in on them. The belt is a little bit more of an expensive one. We are looking for max rolled flask supply to have increased effect, and then as much life as we can, and then hopefully some other mods pertaining to flasks. Here we got reduced flask charges used, and then crafted duration. And then I do personally need the strength that is on this belt, but if you don't need the strength, then that slot can be a res, attribute, whatever it needs to be. Slave drivers, these have gone up quite a bit in price and probably are the most expensive item aside from the ashes on my setup for the build. Who knows, these may continue to go up in price. They seem to have plateaued kind of where they're currently at, but again, they might go up. And then for flasks, we are running triple LE flask with the magics having the flagellance, and then the cold being the taste of hate for the fizz taken as cold. And then we're just running a move speed quicksilver, and a pretty beefy life flask. So that is all of the character gear. We will go over the tree now. So for the tree, again, we're Pathfinder. So speaking of ascendancies, Master Toxist, Nature's Reprisal, Nature's Adrenaline, and Master Surgeon. Now, if you don't feel like you need the life flask tech and maybe you want to run another magic flask instead, you could opt into dropping this node and picking up Nature's Boon instead. But I actually really like this node. Provides a lot of benefits and is super nice when paired up with Petrified Blood, since we essentially just have regen past our Petrified Blood hit pool, allowing us to really still kind of utilize our entire health pool even while running Petrified Blood. In terms of the actual tree, grabbing some aura effect here, spell suppression and life over this way, more life. Splitting here, we're grabbing the flask effect as well as the recover 4% of life when you use a flask, going into a passive chaos cluster jewel with honestly pretty bad notables. I just hit this until I hit a triple one and then just used it. Grabbing this poison wheel for the chance to poison as well as the poison duration and dot multi. More life, and then more aura, reservation and effect, as well as another curse. And then going down, life, suppression, move speed, flasks, life, suppression, another chaos cluster, and then just some dot multi, dual socket, life, then totem life. That's the passive tree. In terms of this character is level 98. In terms of what level you have to be to play this build, you definitely don't have to be 98. There's a number of things here that you can drop in order to meet that. You can just drop a whole cluster jewel setup if you would like. We are running a number of rare jewels just for life and totem life. You'll obviously lose some damage doing this, but the build's already doing some pretty crazy damage, so this isn't really a necessary part of the build. So you definitely can drop some of these. You can also drop some life, as we are fairly tanky. So if you do reduce that life pool, you may limit some of the high-end content that you're able to do, but you should still be able to do a lot of T16 mapping pretty comfortably and without too much fear. So in terms of skills, like I had said before, we are using Devouring Totem. Now we have our Devouring Totem in the bow to take advantage of the +1 and the +2, very similar to a Toxic Rainbow. And then that's scaling our Devouring Totem level to 28 when you combine the bow with the ashes, as well as we are running it with an Empower, giving us quite a number of levels to our Devouring Totem. We're running multiple totem supports, trap support, multiple trap support, and diverging cluster traps for the reduced spread. All in all, this means that we are throwing 5 traps here, and each trap is summoning 2 totems. So effectively, each cast of our traps is throwing 10 totems, which are going to explode, kind of giving us an effective cast rate, hit rate, 5 times our cast per second, which is 1.78. and then multiply that by 2, giving us, I believe, a total cast rate of somewhere in the ballpark of 18 effective hits per second. So pretty crazy numbers there. The rest, we are running Petrified Blood, Enlighten, Anomalous Purity of Elements, and then Grace. This doesn't have to be anomalous, depending on your gear, how close you are to being capped on different resistances. So this is one that you probably could just run a regular Purity of Elements. And then in the chest, we're running Increased Duration, Mortal Call, Withering Step, Arrogance, Enlighten, and Vitality. Again, this could be just a 4-link with the 4 red jewels and then the green jewel in the gloves. So there's not too much fret here if you don't have a 6-link lightning coil. This could also just be a 6-socket 5-link, 6-socket 4-link. So there's plenty of possibilities. In the gloves, we have our curse setup, which we have Despair and Temp Chains, and then we have a swap of Cast When Stunned and Arcanist Bram. Now, the buff that was done to where is it? The buff that was done to Immutable Force was pretty substantial. This jewel, even at this 780%, this gives me a stun duration on myself of 0.04 seconds, meaning that getting stunned is not really doing anything, and we're not really getting stunned. We're kind of just getting like micro stunned, and every once in a while you might get a little bit stun locked, but it never stops you from moving, since moving is a continuous kind of action. You're able to hold left click, and if you're getting stun locked from casting, you can pretty much just hold left click to get out of there. No problem with this. But what it allows us to do is, if we run this and then we make it so our stun threshold is based on 60% of our energy shield, well, we don't have that much energy shield, so this means that pretty much every single hit is stunning us, allowing us to constantly be casting our curses. So this is a way of automating our curses without having to use something like Arcanist Brand or Cast When Damage Taken or some type of Hex Touch support. Yeah, I actually really like this. This allows us to fully automate them, meaning that we're getting a lot closer on this build to being able to just play the build with one hand. Just having one hand on your mouse with a couple of utility things put on your buttons. And yeah, so it's pretty comfy, and I definitely like this setup. But when you're doing bosses, definitely swap in the Arcanist Brand, and you can also take out the Immutable Force and unspec this node, as you know, you're not really going to be able to consistently have full uptime of your curses if you're running this. So definitely for bosses, I would recommend Arcanist Brand. And then for our boots, we just have a Divergent, Herald of Agony, Plague Bearer, linked to an Enhance, and Flame Dash in there as well, just to give us a little bit more cooldown recovery rate on Flame Dash. So that is the skills for the build. Now I'm going to go over the defensive layers. Now this is probably one of the tankiest builds that I have played in a long time, especially considering the investment. Like crazy amounts of survivability. I am able to tank an Uber Shaper Slam. Without a mortal call up, I'm able to run wave 30 simulacrums, seldomly dying, usually only dying if I'm not really paying attention or just kind of being inefficient with how I'm killing things. So yeah, this build is super tanky. It's able to take big hits, it's able to take a lot of hits, and we're able to do that with a variety of different things going on. So first, the biggest one is obviously with the lightning coil, the flask, as well as the helmet. So I think I am at 99% fizz taken as either fire, cold, or lightning, meaning that we are taking 1% of physical damage from hits, so basically nothing. If we're taking a 1000 damage hit, 10 of that is being applied as physical damage, and we do have some armor, and it's kind of sufficient for that. It's able to pretty much mitigate all the fizz damage that we're taking up to 90%. Aside from maybe a Shaper Slam, it's not mitigating it by 90%, but even then we're only taking like 100 to 200 damage from that. Yeah, somewhere between like 100 and 200 damage from that, so kind of really nothing to fret in terms of fizz. And since we are taking everything as elemental damage except for chaos damage, the triple flasks are providing a massive buff with the 20% less damage taken of that element type. And these are full uptime, so basically all the damage that we're taking, we are taking as elemental damage. That's getting applied to our elemental resistances, and then we are also getting advantage of the less damage taken. So all the elemental damage we're taking from hits is very low. And then on top of that, we're running Vitality, we're Petrified Blood, we're recovering 4% of life when we use a flask. We pretty much have full uptime of our health flask as long as we're hitting it every 5 seconds. And we just have a ton of recovery at all times, meaning that we would have to take some really big hits sequentially in order to actually kill us, or consecutively. So there's not really a whole lot that's going to be able to easily kill this build. It's able to tank big hits. It's able to mitigate a ton of hits hitting it at once. And all in all, it's just super strong. I think the defensive layers speak for themselves. A number of people have played Pathfinders with defensive layers like this before. So I don't think it's really anything new. And people that have maybe played some of these Pathfinders will know that this is just a really feels good setup. The only thing that isn't feels good is that if you are taking more damage than your life flask regen can just support by itself, you're in the Petrified Blood territory, and then it looks like maybe your build isn't as survivable because you're like always at half health, but you're doing completely fine. So, and on top of that, we are sporting 100% spell suppression. Overall, the defensive layers feel super smooth, and they're able to tank a variety of really large hits, just making the build feel just good in anything you're doing. I mean, if you're doing Uber Shaper, being able to tank an Uber Shaper Slam makes just the build feel super strong. Being able to just pretty much stand still in a lot of the content you're doing and just throw your traps makes it feel super strong. So yeah, I would definitely recommend trying to build up defensive layers like this. But there's a reason why we're able to build up so many defensive layers. And that is really coming down to the mechanisms that we are taking advantage of here with the new node that has been introduced onto the passive skill trees of weapons, and that is the Totem Explode node. So Totems explode, dealing 600% of their life as physical damage. As you may have noticed with the tree, we're really not grabbing all that much damage. We're grabbing 2 large cluster jewels. We're grabbing an additional curse. We're grabbing 1 poison wheel, and we're grabbing 1 damaging ailments wheel, as well as a totem life wheel. The rest of our points are going into spell suppression, life, jewel sockets, flask charges, flask effect, reservation efficiency. We're able to spend so many points into our defensive layers because we're able to hit some pretty crazy damage numbers with the Totem Explode without a terrible amount of investment. We already kind of went over that we're hitting a stupid number of times a second, and then we have 600% Totem Explode each time we're hitting. So for a quick number breakdown, our totems have 13,610 life. So with this much life, they're exploding and dealing around 80-some thousand damage. So with that, we're able to go do a few different calculations in order to determine how much damage we're doing. We do go into the config and we add added physical damage to spells while running an Ethereal Knives. The Ethereal Knives is just kind of a good biz-based spell to work this all around. But the Ethereal Knives does have a 220% effectiveness of added damage, meaning that any damage that we add is going to be taken as more effect. So we have to just essentially cancel out that effect by reducing how much damage we're adding. So that if we were to add this much, it would be effectively what our totems are exploding for once we factor in the effect. Then we just have to augment our cast speed. So we have a cast speed similar to essentially how many times our totems are hitting per second. And we come up with something like this, where we have around 28 million DPS against an Uber boss with just 10 stacks of Wither. Now, I gave myself 10 stacks of Wither just because, you know, maybe you're not hitting the boss as often as you can. Maybe you're doing a lot of running around. Maybe you're not able to get a full 15 stacks of Wither on the boss. But against an Uber boss, 28 million DPS is really solid. And if we were able to make sure that we're at 15 stacks of Wither, well, we're at 34 million DPS. These are some pretty crazy numbers for how much we're investing into damage. Essentially, for our damage investment, we have a well-crafted bow, we have a 6-link setup, and then we're grabbing the different damage wheels that I talked about on the tree, and that is the extent of our damage. We aren't running any damaging auras aside from Herald of Agony, which is giving us the majority of our poison chance. And the rest of all of our gear and all of our items are going towards defenses. Overall, this is probably the strongest build that I've played for this level of investment. If I had to guess what everything is worth together on my current build, I would say somewhere between 50 and 75 divines. There's a number of items that are going up in price, so this price is subject to change. But, I mean, for a build that can do all content in the game, do it relatively easily, it's doing high damage, it has high survivability, this is a crazy amount of investment that you're able to hit with this. And there's even more investment that you can put into this character. We'll go over first the kind of budget setup for the build. So this is what we would be looking at as more of a budget version of the build. So this is a level 97 Pathfinder. Again, there's a number of things that you could drop here in order to reduce that level down. It's sporting 19 million Shaper DPS, and the items are basically free. My friend did a more detailed breakdown of this build in his own video. I'll link that in the description, and I will also link the POB for this build. But this is pretty much it. It's circumventing a number of the expensive items, including ashes, including slave drivers, and it's not even requiring you to have a 6-link bow or anything like that. I think the final investment for this build was somewhere around 10 divines at the time that we made this video for this, with really a lot of the expenses just being very much spread out amongst all the gear and allowing you to invest significantly more into all of the gear slots. None of the gear here is anything crazy. Most of the rares are just some reses, some medial amounts of life, and then for the weapons and the shield, there's obviously nothing super crazy going on. Here we have a blue weapon and a white shield, and basically the most expensive part of this build is a lightning coil. Again, we did put in a 6-link lightning coil for this, which we are running a 6-link trap setup on, and this is probably the most expensive part, and that's because, you know, this would be the area that you would want to put a reasonable amount of investment into. But this version of the build is getting quite a bit of defenses, and really your weakest point is physical damage taken. Since we do have a low amount of armor, we are taking a reasonable amount of physical damage, but we're still converting a lot of that to elemental types, meaning that we're still taking quite a small hit, and we're able to get a pretty decent effective hit pool with this kind of 10 divine budget setup. Now, we decided to go even lower to really min-max how low you could take this build. And this is a version of the build that has no investment into defensive layers, no investment into damage other than the Totem explode node on a dagger. We don't have a helmet. The only reason we have this shield is for the res as well as the energy shield, and every other item is just blue with 1 or 2 mods on it. Total, we are running still 8 mil DPS against something like Shaper. So there's just a lot of different things that you can do to build this build. It really does not need a lot of investment to do a lot of damage, and then you can build it however you want. So this would be something more on the lines of a much higher investment version of the build. My friend has a detailed Reddit guide going over the decisions being made here, why certain things are chosen, but it's a transcendent Pathfinder that's essentially taking advantage of converting everything to elemental damage, running Transcendence, having a ton of armor, and being triple LE Flask. This makes it so that you're pretty much taking almost no damage from any hit. And yeah, it's a super strong build. I would highly recommend checking out the Reddit guide for it, checking out the video for the more budget version, but these are just some of the possibilities of this build. And it's kind of in conclusion here, this node is insanely busted. By giving us a stupid high base hit for the totems exploding, and by circumventing the totem placement speed and getting hits out there by using traps, multiple traps, since they're not affecting our totem life, they're not affecting the damage of the explosion in any way. All we care about is having as many totems exploding as possible. By being able to do this, we're able to scale our damage to very crazy levels with almost no investment. I mean, you think about most poison builds, you're talking base hits of in the low thousands maybe, and with this build you're talking about base hits of close to 100,000. So I definitely think that this is the most busted node in the game. I think, you know, eventually this will probably be fixed. I don't see this going to standard in this direction. I can't imagine that they would keep it at 600%. They, in my vision, they're probably either going to lower this number or they're going to change things about the interactions between totems and traps. So we'll just have to see. We'll have to see where they decide to put this. But yeah, so that's kind of my detailed breakdown of my build, my version of the build, explored some of the mechanics, the possibilities of the build. And so I want the build to end with some showcases, some Wave 30 Simulacrum stuff, a couple different Uber bosses, as well as tanking some of the Uber boss mechanics so you can see some of the survivability. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this helped explain kind of some of the decisions being made here and why we are potentially doing things in different ways. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And yeah, if you have any further questions, please comment them below. I'll try to get to as many as I can. Thank you for watching the video and have a good one.